think we're ready to go. So you're all set?
Yep.
I'll do the introduction.
Yep, go.
I'll hand it off to you and ready to rock. Well, welcome. We very much appreciate it when people come out on a Monday evening to see a discussion on Montana history or about history in general, for that matter. We love it when people come out for history. So thank you all very much for coming tonight. We really do appreciate it. Tonight we're happy to have Dr. Hal Stearns, who among many other things is a long-time educator. He was an instructor with the University of Montana's Lifelong Learning Institute. He's a researcher and he's a historian of the American West. Dr. Stearns has had an extensive career serving the people of Montana and beyond. He taught high school history and other subjects, as high school teachers are often called to do, for 28 years. And he served in the Montana Army National Guard for close to 40, retiring as a brigadier general. He is a board member of a number of historical foundations. He has served as a Lewis and Clark interpreter for many tour groups, and he was a guest speaker for bicentennial events across the country. In 2003 in Missoula, for a presentation he designed for the Confluence of Cultures event, he played the part of William Clark. As an older man looking back at the expedition, doing his best to put the people in direct contact with the past. I did a little bit of research on Mr. Stearns, and I got to say I'm very impressed. I'm I'm the resident kind of historical nerd here, so I very much can't wait to see what he has. He's clearly a devoted educator and a public historian, which is a phenomenal field to be a part of, and we are happy to have him here with us at the Billings Public Library. So if you would please help me welcome Dr. Hal Stearns.
Pretty close to the way I wrote it. That's what you might think. Any rate, my commander-in-chief over here, this is my bride, Sheila, and Sheila is the one that keeps an eye on me and says that she's going to let me know when she thinks I'm at the point where I better be winding things down. So, who knows, though, I might look the other way. Maybe. We'll see how things go. Are we ready to see if they know anything about Montana? Yeah, I'm ready. Let's go ahead and see if anybody knows anything about this place called Montana. Yeah, just listen for a minute.
Well, I was thumbing me a ride down this rainy Ekalaka road when along came a 4x4 that was beat to hell and not that old. If you're going to Ekalakamack, you can ride along with me. So I threw my saddle in the back and I climbed up in that seat. He asked me if I'd seen a road with so much gumbo mud. I said, there ain't a road in old Montana that I ain't traveled, bud. I've been to Montana, man, yes, I'm an old Montana man. I've been all around this state, my friend. I've seen the mountains grand, from the Badlands to the Wheatlands. I've been to Montana. I've been to Harlow, Shoto, Glasgow, Martinsdale, Chico, Webo, Saco, Fishtail, Missoula, Malta, Nashua, Rockvale, Helena, Plevna, Angela, Pinesdale, Baker, Gardner, Haver, Hinsdale, Springdale, Grantsdale, Ferndale. Hear me wail, I've been to Montana, man. I'm an old Montana man. I've been all around this state, my friend. I've seen the mountains grand, from the Badlands to the Wheatlands. I've been to Montana. I've been to Molt, Volt, Babb and Boyd, Troy, Roy, Fife and Freud, Hysham, Hingham, Harlem, Norris, Wyndham, Wisdom, Bozeman, Broadus, Anaconda, Vida, Venanda, Ovando, Elmo, Evero, Buffalo. Here we go, I've been to Montana, man. I'm an old Montana man. I've been all around this state, my friend. I've seen the mountains grand, from the Badlands to the Wheatlands. I've been to Montana. I've been to Browning, Ringling, Belt, Opportunity, Billings, Sterling, Butte, Zorkie, Homestake, Intake, Rygate, Whitefish, Castle Rock, Crow Rock, Two Dot, Whitlash, Lewistown, Frenchtown, Jimtown, Round Butte, Square Butte, Gold Butte, Heart Butte, what a hoot, I've been to Montana, man. I'm an old Montana man, I've been all around this state, my friend. I've seen the mountains grand, from the Badlands to the Wheatlands. I've been to Montana. I've been to Helmville, Centerville, Marysville, Hathaway, Powderville, Stevensville, Walkerville, Woods Bay, Dayton, Dutton, Dillon, Polebridge, Big Arm, Big Sky, Bighorn, Coleridge, Deer Lodge, Red Lodge, Belfry, Busby, Libby, Isme, Quigley. Believe me, I've been to Montana, man. I'm an old Montana man. I've been all around this state, my friend. I've seen the mountains grand, from the Badlands to the Wheatlands. I've been to Montana. Many's the time I've made that drive from Lookout Pass to Old Glendive, from the beautiful Bighorn Canyon walls to the Canadian line, up past Great Falls, from little southeastern town of Biddle. Now I'm here making music with Devlin and Riddle, from West Beaedecker, Menai to Alzade and back. I've been all over Montana. Let's not forget Livingston, Harlowton, Hamilton, York, Jordan, Lincoln, Hardin, Forks, Circle, Sydney, Summers, Hobson, Knowlton, Moulton, Polson, Dodson, Broadview, Fairview, Pineview, Park City, Cook City, Silver City, Miles City, very pretty. I've been to Montana, man. I'm an old Montana man. I've been all around this state, my friend. I've seen the mountains grand, from the Badlands to the Wheatlands. I've been to Montana, oh yeah, I've been to Montana.
Anybody's hometown left out? Yours?
Point.
Was it Wolf Point? Slam. Oops. All right, they were called the Traveling Sons of Beaches, and they were headquartered out of Polson. One of them drove all the way from Missoula to Glendive when Sheila and I got married to sing in our wedding. Another one was one of my students years ago, so I had no choice but to invite me to a few of their events. You're not going to, this is very hard to find anymore, unhappily, because I think it's just such a wonderful testament to this great place that we call Montana. You know, Montana is a place that every one of us has those kinds of feelings about it. You can think of all of the things that are near and dear to us. Right now, one of my love affairs of the moment is to tell a story about a little railroad that was only in one little section of Montana. It was called the Jawbone, or the Montana Railroad. Hardly lasted any time at all, and it's a fantastic story. And I just was able to present it at the Historical Society a week and a half ago to a full crowd. And if you ever get a chance, go online, Montana Historical Society, and you'll be able to take a look at any of the Zoom productions that they do. Once a month they have somebody come in and do something. I carry one of these little maps with me all the time, and when Sheila and I were traveling over from Missoula yesterday, and we'd be passing a car, and it was 40 we'll say, I'd say, Sheila, 40. Now she'd know that one because we have a friend who's from Big Timber. Or we might turn around and say 7, and she'd say, come on, that's too easy for me. I know. Anybody know what it is? Kalispell. Or we might say, okay, smarty pants, 53. Oh, you think it is? Let's see where it is. Let's see. Number 53. No, it's Golden Valley, right? So here's what I carry. I carry a map of Montana that I've plasticized, and down here I have every license plate, county seat, and county. And everybody in my family thinks, you have gone too far with all this. I now have my grandkids in one family. If they pass a car, a Montana car, and it doesn't have a number on it, they're kind of ticked about it. Because they have a little competition of who can get the most license plates going. So, at any rate, let me tell you a little bit about, I have my Top Gun partner here, Sheila, with me tonight.
For 10 more seconds. Okay,
Okay.
this and this.
Okay,
Just
this and
this
this,
little
that one will go, okay. This and this, got it, okay.
I won't be far.
Okay, good, thank you. All right. Boy, that girl keeps an eye on me. We haven't been together that long, though. Let's see, what was it? Just about the time of the square wheel, 55 years. Well, I'd like to show people this, too, because history is a puzzle. And one of the neat things about history is I'm always trying to put the puzzle together. And it isn't always a very easy thing to do. And I have to admit that every once in a while, I would like to erase something from the past as well. But there isn't any way that I can do that either. So here's the best thing I can do, and that is to look at everything as closely as I possibly can. And that's what it's all about. So, at any rate, what we're going to do is I'm going to tell you a few stories about my take. And just understand, it is not everybody, it is just a few of them, but we'll get a kind of an idea. Now, I carry this card with me all the time. I have it in my wallet, which happens to be out in the car at the moment, though. And those are the Army values. And every time he said that I had finished retired as a brigadier general, it didn't matter any kind of units I ever talked to, I would always emphasize this kind of a point right here. In my Naval Academy graduate, he would have had something very similar to this, because this is really what it is all about. And in a way, isn't that what so many parts of what leadership is about? At any level, it really in some ways has these very, very similar points. So now here are some of my best friends. I just love these stories. My favorites, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark and Sakakawea, Sacagawea, and Thomas Jefferson. You know, that was all one big saga. And then another one of my great heroes right here was Abraham Lincoln. So when I've always had a lot to do with this little batch, but that's not what we're going to talk about any of those tonight. They got to be from around this neck of the woods. So I'm just going to start by sharing with you a number of people who in some way or another have made some kind of a difference. So we'll start with Beaedecker. Now, the former governor's wife, the grande dame for over a half a century, she really devoted her life to public service. And she was the key player in getting the restoration of the Montana Capitol. And I'm just president of the Montana Historical Society Board right now, so I'm thrilled about this. We are adding on to this amazing building, and anybody wants to get the checkbooks out tonight, get them out, and however many zeros that you have on there, add a couple of more, because cost overruns are just there. But the fact is that she made a great deal of difference in terms of Montana's story, so that's why I've included her. Now, Jack Horner, a name that we're all familiar with. You've all been down to the Museum of the Rockies and the beautiful campus at MSU. And this great paleontologist, a lot of people weren't aware of the fact he was a Montana kid, too. He was a Shelby boy.
Use the microphone as you can.
Use the microphone most of the time?
Yes, please.
Okie doke. You do what the commander-in-chief tells you and you'll be fine. So, at any rate, you've been down there and you've seen that unbelievable collection. And, you know, this man, truly an amazing, amazing scientist, was at the university at Bozeman for a long, long time, and then went back out to the state of Washington, and he was one of those that I would put in my hero category. All right, the next one I want to tell you about is Joseph Dixon, this maverick Republican. He was one that was really kind of an interesting one, but one of the interesting things is little things like this. The first old age pension program fought to raise taxes on the mines. And why do we care about this guy? Because he was one hard charger. Now, if you get a chance to go over to Helena and go into when you go in the main building there, go up the stairs and go into that magnificent rounded area, and you'll see where there are an awfully lot of the great Montana heroes. And he will be one of them that you'll see when you get there. Wild Bill Kelly. Now, this guy was the great Grizzly football player. Some said that I love this, pugnacious on the field, but he didn't swagger. Arrogance was never part of his makeup. The greatest Grizz made the NFL Hall of Fame, and he had passed away by the time he was just 29 years old. Boy, he's one of the guys I would love to have had an opportunity to meet. All right, Emmanuel Taylor Gordon. I will never forget one time making a trip with my family. We were going from our hometown of Harlowton to go over and visit my mom's side of the family, who were in the Whitehall area, and then we would go over and visit my dad's side of the family, who were between Anaconda and Deer Lodge. And so we were driving through White Sulphur Springs, and I saw Emmanuel Taylor Gordon. I was just a young pup when I saw him for the first time, and I can remember it took all the way from White Sulphur Springs to through the pass, all the way down through the canyon to Townsend before Dad was talking about this amazing young man who was from White Sulphur Springs, Montana. Big surprise to many people. All right, Daniel McKay. Now this guy, if you like the fact that we have 56 counties, you'll like him, because this fella had this idea that what he ought to do is to build as many buildings as he can. So he had a big white horse that he rode all over along the High Line, particularly, and told people every chance he had, what you people need is a county seat. And I'll tell you what, there is no reason you ought to have to go miles and miles and miles to take care of official business. I think you need a county seat, and it ought to be right here. And I, by the way, am very good at building buildings. And this guy, many argue that without a doubt, at least 7 Montana counties we can attribute to one man, and played a major role in the case of 5 more. And most people would say, I'd never heard of the dude. Okay, Frank Linderman, another one of my favorites, a great friend of Indians, a great author of chronicles, 5 volumes of traditional Indian tales sought to create the reservations for Montana's Cree and the Chippewa, often a lonely voice. But when you think that we are worrying more and more about caring about all of us as Montanans, I'm glad to see that. Any event you go to now in Missoula, for example, doesn't matter what kind of an event. It could be a music event, it could be a college football game, doesn't matter. But there will be something said that we are in the historic homeland of Native peoples. That's just said with every official occasion that is held in Missoula now. So, Evelyn Cameron. Now, if you haven't been to Terry and gone to that fabulous little museum, you've got to put it on the bucket list. Evelyn Cameron came from a lot of money, and she and her husband wanted to come out with the idea that they were going to raise racehorses. So they moved from good old England, and before it was done, they weren't racing racehorses, and instead what they were doing was raising cows, and had a lot of cowboys, and she was all by herself, and she took up photography. And you have got to, if you haven't already seen some of her magnificent work, you'll find it in every library. You can do it right here. And you know, a library is one of the greatest places in the world to just bring people together. But the fact is, she cared about everybody, and it didn't matter who you were, you would be in one of her photographs. So, one of my great favorites. Okay, Arthur L. Stone. Now, if you happen to be from Missoula, you'd know this name because he started the University of Montana School of Journalism, a great teacher, and we have Stone Mountain in Missoula. But he always wanted to have the highest journalistic standards. Journalism must always be a day's march ahead. And I always like that idea, especially in this day and age when I take my dog out for walks all the time and I walk by so many streets and I'll see one house out of 15 that even get a daily newspaper. And I think of the fact of what journalism has meant to telling us the story of who we are, what we are about. And we don't have to agree with it all the time. One of the greatest, Joseph Kinsey Howard, the great man called the Conscience of Montana. His great work called Montana, High, Wide, and Handsome. Look at the publishing date, 1943, and then 2 others of his great ones, Montana Margins and Strange Empire. Interestingly enough, every time there has ever been any kind of a competition of the great Montana books, guess what is number 1? A book, 1943. His book is the one. He was a great, great reporter. The Bear family. Well, now I think you have a little something or another right here in this village that has something to do with that family. But Charles, Marguerite, Alberta, you know those names, right across the street, right here. We got something going here. But he was the largest wool producer, shipper that we ever had, and his lasting legacy was long after he was gone. But the fact is, leaving so much for the betterment of Montana. So that if you go and you lived in Big Timber, or you lived in White Sulphur Springs, or Townsend, or Martinsdale, or Two Dot, or Rygate, or Roundup, you have the possibility of being the recipient to this very day of a Bear Family Scholarship. One time at a national gathering of people that were in the sheep business, and everybody had heard about this big-time sheep guy out of Montana. And so, this fellow from New Hampshire finally runs over and says, Mr. Bear, I'd like to meet you because you and I share the same passion. We raise sheep. Well, nice to meet you. Yes, sir, nice to meet you. And I've got a pretty darn big operation up here in New Hampshire where I am. Really? Mm-hmm. And he says, I run about 500 head. And Charlie Bear goes, well, that's quite amazing. Now, are you talking about sheep or sheepdogs? Well, that was the Bear family. Okay. Louis Beaedecker. Here's another name that most of us never heard of, but if you've ever been picked up by the Highway Patrol, you probably had. But he was the very first, but his dream was to have public safety out on the roads. So that's why I've included him in my list. Hardly anybody's ever heard anything of him. But he was later on the Montana State Prison warden too. But he was a tremendous advocate for law and order. Senator Thomas Walsh. Again, let's go to over to Helena and go up into the big Capitol and take a look at things. But this man, the great expert on mining and constitutional laws, but one of the giants. I highlight the Teapot Dome scandal investigation, women's suffrage, the League of Nations, a straight shooter, and I love one of the great lines, don't ever ask for favors. Now, this is one you're going to want to do a little research on because he'll keep you up all night with some of the things that he was a firm believer in. Alma Jacobs. Alma Jacobs was the Great Falls librarian who became the greatest of all. Who we got in here from a library? Got any library people in here right now? Yeah, you better remember this name then, you two, because she was the great supporter of libraries and firmly believed that we had to be careful about censorship. And for 2 decades, she was the Montana State Librarian. But this great, great woman was really one of the giants, I think, in Montana's story. Next one, Marco Roscoe. All right, low-key, kind of tough-minded. Now, he proceeded to lose state races 3 times after he had won 54 or 56 murder cases, but later elected twice to serve. And in 1998, now here's the interesting one, that's why I've included him, his approval rating was 87%, the highest of every governor in the United States. So one time I'm in an airport in Atlanta, I'm walking by, and he's there with his family, and he says, "Hi, Hal." And I looked over, and it was Mark Roscoe. And I said, "Well, hi there, Mr. Governor." He says, "It's Mark." Now, what do you think we did? We didn't talk about politics. We talked about something else we shared in common. We were both Notre Damers. The great K. Ross Toole. The biggest building they had on the campus in Missoula is where he had his classes. If you didn't get there early, you didn't get a seat. Everybody wanted to take K. Ross, and they said that if he was not your professor somewhere along the line, you did not go to school in Missoula. That's all there was it. But his great ones, Montana Uncommon Land, 20th Century, State of Extremes, The Rape of the Great Plains. He was a tremendous, tremendous person. And I had to include him for sure because he's the one who, when I'd finished coursework and I said, "Well, Dr. Toole, I've got to come up with a thesis." He said, "Well, where are you from?" He knew where I was from. But I said, "Central Montana, I'm from Harlowton." He said, "Okay, get after it, you better get going." So that's what I wrote my thesis on. Later on, when I wrote a dissertation, he was on my committee as well. I have to have him there, of course. Now, next one I'm going to include is Norman McLean. River Runs Through It. Well, the love story of a family, considered one of the great classics, and I love that idea in our family. There was no clear line between religion and fishing. And another one that was a gem, Young Men and Fire, the great tragedy of the fire that was in the area of the Gates of the Mountains, tragic loss of life. But if you haven't read that great book, River Runs Through It, you got to get it and pick it up. It is a gem. All right, Sonny Holland, three-time an All-American football player, some say the greatest athlete the Bozeman ever had. 7 years he coached the Cats, then alumni director. He was really just the most dedicated, enthusiastic, and this was it. Great leaders lead. And boy, I'll tell you, that was the way Sonny Holland was. He acted like he knew everybody. Everybody. William Brother Van Orsdale. He was called Brother Van or Great Heart, a kind man. He was a fellow that came out here with the idea that he was going to try to be kind of a minister who just rode around talking to people as a tireless circuit rider. Well, he goes into a little town that is down between, or not far from Towson, called Raidersburg, not too far from Townsend. And he's riding into town. He always wore a big black outfit, big hat and everything else, and a black horse. And a couple of the cowboys are coming out of the bar, and they've been drinking pretty heavy, and they're madder than hops because a bunch of cows have just been taken. And one of them, as he's walking along like this, says, "You know, I'll bet that's him. Doesn't he look like he'd be a thief?" And they decided to string him up. And one of them went over and got a rope, and they put him right back up on the horse that they had taken him off of, and they went over to a tree, and they put a noose around his neck, and he began to sing a great piece called "Nearer My God to Thee." And one of the guys says, "You know, anybody that's got that good a voice and knows every word to that one, he ain't no thief." And the story goes that they all went back into the bar and sat at the table right in the front while Mr. Circuit Rider conducted a little service. Chief Plentycoo. Anytime I go down to Red Lodge, I have to go and see the monument right there at the big circle as you're coming in, whether you're coming in from Absorkey or you're coming in from Laurel, heading in. I always have to go and take a look, but he was the great hereditary chief of the Crow and was really a great peacemaker and peacekeeper. He really was somebody who many argue that agriculture and service and religion, and especially for young Indian people to make it, you were going to have to get an education. He was an astounding guy. And if you haven't been to your own Montana State Park, very close to where you are, make a point of going down there sometime. One of my real highlights was the fact I had the opportunity to go there and to be a speaker one time, and I was thrilled to see about the 30 or 40 people who were there that I was the only guy that wasn't an Indian. And I got to talk about him, somebody I admired so much. Francis Bardenau, and he is one of the greats. And also you see that shield that is there in his honor. This Democrat considered a fiscal conservative, and you could see that he had a cleft palate, speech impediment, but the idea was that when this man got up to speak at a state legislative gathering, the place came to a stop. It didn't matter political persuasion. When Francis Bardenau spoke, you listened. He was held in the greatest respect. Now, you can see a couple of things, though. Here he was, fiscal conservative, but a social liberal. Could have been the other way around with him, because he was a little bit of everything, because he believed so much that Montana can do well. Granville Stewart, a jack of all trade, a man who was the gold miner, rancher, vigilante, president of the Montana Territorial Council, the founder of the Montana Historical Society. And again, if you want to get your checkbooks out tonight, I will be very happy to take the contributions back to Helena with me. But he was very public-spirited with the great ideals. And I'm thrilled to see that we have really honored and will continue to honor this amazing guy in terms of what he offered to Montana's territorial story. John and Frank Craighead. These brothers, wilderness and the wild places, the grizzly bears and the field studies, 5 decades of investigating and waking the nation to the need for saving our landscapes. They were leaders in terms of our understanding that it is important that we have the wild things and we have the wild places. And they were a couple of Montanans. Okay. Next one, Burton K. Wheeler. And if you go again, go into the Capitol, there you'll see it. The anti-war isolationist, fought the Anaconda Company, the straight shooter, embraced the job of senator, 24 years, no compromise, look him in the eye, offered the vice presidency in 1940. Possibility that he could have been president. He was the one who battled about the Teapot Dome and that great scandal. So another one of the big players. Boy, I'd like to have had the chance to meet him. Oh, wait a minute. My brother Bill was 10, I was 12. We got a message up at the Edison Grade School in Harlowton. You boys get home as fast as you possibly can. And we got home and in the what was called the new room of our house, and there was Burton K. Wheeler stopping and visiting with my mom and dad. And we, of course, just sat there kind of, what are we doing here? But Dad reminded us of at least 355 times, boys, you were with one of the giants. Never forgot. Never forgot. All right. Father Pierre Jean de Smet established many missions in the far west, traveled constantly, such a good man. But one of the reasons that he is so important is because he represented Indian points of view during treaty making sessions. He was one who would listen to what was being proposed, and then he would visit with the Indian people and saying, you're getting ripped. And that's the way he was. He was an astounding guy. He was one of the great Montana giants. And when we think of the missions that we have in western Montana, down at St. Mary's and up at St. Ignatius, a lot of that is Father Pierre Jean de Smet. All right, Robert McAvee Scriver. This great scope. Now, when you've been in Missoula or in Helena, you have seen the magnificent bucking horse statue, and if you, that is one of his pieces. And if you've ever been to Fort Benton and you have seen the Shep story right there along the boardwalk, he was the one that did it. The story goes that there was a fellow that was a long-time sheep herder, and he got the word that the last of his family back in Iowa had passed away, and he decided he had better go back to the funeral. Didn't pay any attention to the moment, gets on a train, they couldn't stop the train. He gets back there, never to be heard of again. But the story goes that Shep met every train for years. And it was finally a man who rode the trains as a conductor who realized every time I come into this community, there's a dog that shows up. And so that monument was done by the great Bob Scriver, really one of the giants. All right, Senator Lee Metcalf, I've included him because, look at this, 4 terms in the House, 2 in the Senate, but wilderness was his great one. Defender of the outdoors, the Great Bear Wilderness, the Absaroka Beartooth, great leaders leading. He was one of these guys that periodically, Sheila and I have taken our dog or taken a couple of grandkids and driven down to the Stevensville area to the Lee Metcalf Wildlife Area, and it's right there off the highway. And there's good reason, because that's an area for anybody. You don't need to go way up on the high country and get up there and go down into some valley in order to appreciate something So Lee Metcalf, one of them. A.B. Guthrie. The Big Sky, The Way West, Thousand Hills, R5, Fairland, acclaimed for historical accuracy. He loved to dispel the gun and gallops. Love and passion, the Rocky Mountain Front and the Grizz. Sometimes I think the ability to be outraged is all that keeps me going. Now, interestingly enough, I put right here, fun neighbor. He and his wife lived right next door to where Sheila and I lived in Missoula. And we had a chance to visit them in their home up in the Shoto area. He was about as down-to-earth kind of a guy. He said he'd get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and he'd write for 2.5 hours, and then he loved to take long naps and he loved to read detective stories. That's what he liked to do. All right, Jeanette Rankin. If I'm ever remembered, I want to be remembered as the only woman who ever voted to give women the right to vote. First Congresswoman. An unpopular vote against both world wars, elected in 1916, one of 50, and then, guess, do some math work and you'll see, 24 years later, she was reelected, serving again only one term, again voting against our entry into World War II. She was a Montana girl, and if you ever get a chance to go out and see the Statuary Hall of Fame in Washington, D.C., you can see Jeanette Rankin while you're there. All right, Eloise Cobell. I wish that Eloise would have lived long enough that she would have been able to see how the final conclusion came out. This woman, rancher, banker, Blackfoot member, she is the woman who won the recognition and respect for Indian people after having been cheated out of money by the federal government since the late 1800s. And it had to do with the leases on oil, gas, grazing, and timber on Indian lands. Were literally getting nothing, and then when they did get something, they got about this much. And she fought it all the way to the courts, and before it was done, unhappily, she passed away before the United States Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Indian people. She was one of the real giants. I would love to have met her. Now the Copper Kings, there they are. Clark and Daly. Well, these two, the hard chargers, greed and dominance, they dominated our landscape like no other. Clark, 13 mines, smelter, bank, newspapers, railroad, Daly, and Anaconda, and Hamilton, lock, stock, and barrel, the nation's richest copper mine, the Anaconda in Butte. And then, of course, we had to see where we were going to locate the capital. Clark was for Helena, Daly would have been for anywhere, but he was for Anaconda. And the absolute extreme of how leadership can intoxicate and overwhelm, and they were something else. This is a guy I happen to know very well. This was my dad, who used to proudly say he was the son of Swedish homesteaders with 160 acres of land. Went to a one-room school, a university journalism degree. Now, he used to talk about himself as really being really a pretty darn smart guy. And I said, well, Dad, tell me, how smart were you? And he said, well, you know, I did graduate number one in my class. Really? Yes, I did. You know, that one-room school I went to right over there, that girl was so smart. He graduated number 2. His great newspaper column was the editor's uneasy chair. Before he was done, he had honorary doctorates from both U of M and MSU. But what stood out, when I asked him one time in later years, he said the fact that everything I worked for to get a new elementary school, a new gym, and a paved Highway 12. He said those were the things I felt were my greatest accomplishments. And you know, it says something about small towns, doesn't it? And what is important to people. All right. Well, here he is. If you ever were going to ask somebody who, of everybody that you would ever say was number 1, there he is. Voted number 1 most noteworthy Montanan in any type of a time when we've ever done any kind of a test saying, who do you think? What do you think? But his great idea, I was born 100 years too late. And he loved the West. No doubt about it. He came from some money in St. Louis, came out, he could have stayed back there and the big money that his family had. Nope, he came out and he began to do art. And sometime, if you haven't been to the Charlie Russell up in Great Falls, you got to go and see it. You got to see the bar that is there, where he used to pony up to the bar and buy drinks for all of his buddies. And he was a great one, and he always maintained that, yep, I was pretty good, but really the great one was my wife. Nancy is the one that kind of kept me straight and narrow. And of course, everybody loves his great work. All right, Maureen and Mike Mansfield. And if you've ever seen anything that has been said about Mansfield, it will always be her name first, and it will always be both names. I can only tell you of one instance where it was only Mike Mansfield. He always referred to himself and wanted anybody to call him Mike. I can still remember as a kid, one time that I was washing dishes and he was right beside me in my hometown of Harlowton, and he was drying dishes right there. I tell that one because it hits me that that's the way Mike Mansfield was. He wanted to know Montanans, all Montanans. It didn't matter who you were. And look at this, served in the Navy, the Marines, the Army. Now, let's go to Arlington, and let's just take a look at this. His gravestone, and you'll have to go through the little book to find it, and this is what it says. Mike Mansfield, Private, United States Marine Corps. That's what it says. As humble a guy as anybody you would ever want to meet. Truly one of the giants. The Devil's Brigade. This was a special unit trained at Fort Harrison, just outside of Helena. And it was a group that was put together that was a joint American-Canadian commando unit. These are kids that came from farming, ranching backgrounds, had worked in timber industry, and the intent was that they were going to, because they were so good with the out-of-doors, they knew how to handle extreme heat, cold, didn't matter if it was bugs, snakes, or whatever. So this unit was trained at Fort Harrison, just on the edge of Helena, Montana, and they were going to do an attack coming down through the north of Finland, Norway, Sweden, to help divert Nazi forces to the north. As it turned out, it was squashed, and they came up with a new form. They put them down, sent them all the way to the boot of Italy, and they came up. And they were given this great name of the Black Bastards, because they would only attack at night, and they totally lived for these values. Every other year, they would either meet in British Columbia, Alberta, or Saskatchewan, and then in Helena. So, one up in Canada, Montana. Canada, Montana. One of the highlights of my whole life was I got to be their dinner speaker one time. And I'll tell you, it was the most moving moment for me personally that I ever had in terms of any group that I ever talked to, because they were genuine heroes. They haven't met in a number of years because there aren't any of them left. Okay. Well, there he is. Well, when leading, don't forget to lead. I'd say that's the big ice I'd have for him. Be careful of what you wish for and may get. Now, you know, he graduated from West Point, last in his class, and he was the youngest Civil War general. And for years and years, you know, it was called Custer's Last Stand, even in all the brochures that came out, right? And then it was changed to Battle of the Little Bighorn. Oh, there were Indians there too. Yeah. For years, we had the idea that he was the only one that was even involved in any of the action whatsoever. But boy, would I have liked to have met him. I sure as heck would. Because during the Civil War, he did attack at a time when people did not think that anybody was going to pull the kind of stuff that he was doing. But I'd like to have met him. Now, I also then have to say something about Sitting Bull. Tatanka Layota. Lakota Sioux, the spiritual leader, the medicine man, the last Sioux chief to surrender to the U.S. government. But these these are a couple of my favorite lines, and that's what I like most. Now that we are poor, we are free. No white man controls our footsteps. If we must die, we die defending our rights. In my early days, I was eager to learn and to do things. Therefore, I learned quickly. Each man is good in the sight of the Great Spirit. Oh, I'd like to have met him. This is the great 1941 Montana State College football team. It was immortalized by Ivan Doig in the wonderful work called The 11th Man. So many of these young potential leaders died in World War II. They, of course, like anybody, you go off to high school, go off to college, get a degree, play football, do all the things that you do, but the fact is, they all had great dreams. The self-starters and tough Montana kids. By the way, in World War II, Montana had the second highest death rate of that team. They lost well over half of the team. And there's Ivan Doig, the Montana native, the writer of so many great books about Montana, House of Sky, English Creek. His characters, regular folks. He was a kid that came from up in the area around Lenup and Ringling, White Sulphur Springs. He was an interesting guy. One time when I was out in Seattle visiting a brother, and I was going to go down to an area to go to run around this lake, and I saw this guy walking along, and I stopped my car because I recognized him, and I went over, and he gave me about 3 minutes and said, "I'm in kind of a hurry." But I always thought, you know, I'm glad I got to just say hi to him. A guy I've known a long time, 45 years in law enforcement, is at one time America's national police officer, a guy from Missoula, Montana. And I always liked this at his last retirement. I always loved that line. It's greater to serve than to rule. And he was a tremendous police officer. Chief Plenty Coup, the last of the Chief of the Crow, great peacetime leader, a great advocate, fought long and hard, traveled to D.C. 10 times to fight with a plan to allow white settlement to move on to Crow land. No way. Fight it. Be against it. Encouraging young Crow to join the Army. In 1921, chosen as the representative of all American Indians to the dedication of the tomb of the unknown soldier. And this is the monument that's down in Red Lodge. I stop every time I ever go through Red Lodge. I just have to stop and take a look. He's one of them I'd like to have met. Joe McDonald. Joe, a great guy, a national leader in the American Indian education. He was the founder and the president of Salish Kootenai College on the way up toward Polson, just near Ronan. For 30 years, he was the great face of Indian education, teacher, coach, administrator. But the thing that I liked about him was that he was a great, great bridge builder, and his idea was Indian kids have got to go to higher education. It's absolutely essential. Okay, we're almost done. Judy Martz, 1943, 2017. She was a cool lady. You play the cards you're dealt with and you do your best. And she always had the turtle pin. You see it over here on her blouse. Behold the turtle. It only moves forward with its neck out. She had been a great Olympic speed skater, and her Christian faith had meant a great deal to her. But she was really another one who really kind of stood up when a lot of other people didn't think that women shouldn't be doing those kinds of things at all. And then Joseph. Joseph of the great Indian peoples, his own, the Nez Perce. Their home was the Wallowa Valley, just to the west of where we are here, heading up toward Shaman and going on to where the great surrender took place, the Battle of the Bear Paw. 1,700 miles, this man who was a spiritual leader of his people, he was the one who uttered the great line, from where the sun now stands, or fight no more forever. He went back for nearly 30 years and spoke at the United States Congress and said, we must look out for our Indian peoples. Richard Austin Harlow. This is the guy that's a real favorite of mine because he had this dream of building a Montana railroad, only 167 miles long. And before it was done, he paid off every bill he ever had. And the Milwaukee had to buy the canyon in order to build toward the west. And I just think of people that I'd like to have met from another day and age. And my hometown was named for him. So you can imagine, when I was doing my research, this family meant a great deal to me. Bob Marshall, a lot of you have been up in the Bob Marshall, the great wilderness advocate. He was the rich kid that came out with his degrees from Harvard and Johns Hopkins, serving in all kinds of jobs. And when he came out, he was such an unbelievable advocate for Indian people, for wild spaces, roadless areas, trying to inventory our lands. He wanted to see everything for everybody, for the good of all. He died when he was only 38 years of age. He was one of the great doers. It's too bad that he didn't make it a little longer. Waded Cruzado, the president of Montana State University. Excellence in education, teaching and learning, research, creativity, service, and outreach. Those have been her three-piece mission statements from the very beginning. Strategic planning, transformational learning, scholarship, expanding horizons. This woman, her dream, reshaped the face and future of the Treasure State with our first grade land-grant college. And I'm going to be in trouble, but I don't care. Somebody who I like a lot, the Commissioner Emerita, Higher Education, first Montana woman Rotarian, first Montana University System Chancellor, Western, first woman college president in Nebraska, first woman president at University of Montana, first and only woman commissioner of higher ed, 9 years, honorary doctorates from both of them. And look at this. This is in essence what I've been talking about. Bridge building, communicating, everybody counts, everybody is special. Work harder than everybody else. That's just a fact. I'm her bus driver, and I don't mind it one bit for 55 years. Now I'm going to leave you with this. It's all done. So here's my take. What do we have? What are great leaders? You got to be a giver. You got to enjoy learning, to work hard, to trust others, to get the teamwork and form partnerships, community, business, state. Participate in your community. Always keep in mind a time to lead and a time to follow. Sometimes you have to say no. Do yes when you can. And communicate. Be well informed, open, honest, speak and write with clarity and care, and have fun. And family always has to be number one. Now that's my take. And I love to look at history through a little glass like this. And I like to look at different personalities. And I read between the lines a lot. I'm always trying to figure out, why is it that somebody is able to accomplish something? Why is it that they are able to make a difference? Now you should all have your own lineup of who you want to see as Montana leaders. And yours can vary very much different than what mine are. Because just understand, these are just mine. This is my take on it. Would I have liked to have met every one of them? Without a doubt. I would love to have seen some of those people in action as a representative, as a senator, as a governor, as a football player, as an educator, as somebody who just would do whatever they had to do in order to make a difference. You know, you got to step forward. And in my wallet, which is out in the car right now, that little card I showed you at the very beginning, I carried that card with me from the very beginning of my own Army days. To this very day, I carry my card. I'm done. close to time?
Good?
All right, now let's shoot the breeze for just a minute or two. Anybody, got somebody you want to have me add to the list?
Anybody you didn't put on the list you wish you had?
Are there a few others? I could easily have put Thomas Marr on the list. Yes, I could have.
How about Governor Nutter?
I could have put Donald Nutter there. There was another one I could have.
Andrew Harris?
Hammonds, yes. Anybody else got one?
Edward J. Simmons.
Okay, yes, I do. You know,
Steele.
I saw him just the other night too, by the way. Who else you want to?
Ben Steele.
Ben Steele. Okay, I'll tell you, somebody I grew up with, my little hometown of Harlowton, a guy by the name of Don Thompson. And Don and his wife were the ones that have taken off with the famous wonderful shows that you have up at Big Fork every year. Live theater, wonderful theater. And J.K. Simmons, for example, that's where he got started. At any rate, to make sure that we would have some things that kind of enrich us, that would be Montana. I think of the Fort Peck Players and the performances that they've had over the years. I think there'd be a really, has to be another one that I put on my little magic list. All right, throw out another name you think. Wellington Rankin, yes. Wellington Rankin. Now there's another one that is a story and a half too. Dorothy Heck. Another, yes, another real gem. Dorothy Heck is another one of the greats. Boy, I'm gonna have to make, next time I come here, it's gonna have to be 2 hours and you're gonna have to bring a lunch. All right, anybody else got one? Well, how do you like my list? Do you think I had a pretty good make though? Yeah.
I'd add on Wheeler, State Supreme Court.
You would like BK,
Yeah, and also on Paul's, he was gonna do Supreme Court, but it's assessment.
that's right. All right, anybody else? Well, how about, or the vigilantes of Montana? I suppose. How about Lucia Darling? Everybody know who she was? First school teacher in Montana. The Bannock School.
McConnell, what was his first name?
Oh, yeah, I think it's George. There'd be another one too. Wilbur Sanders. Boy, I got a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
Good, Greg, I'm gonna be up all night tonight. Mary Ellen, I'm not gonna do any dishes. I'm not gonna do any dishes tonight. All right, now, one of the things, I want you to know how I'm thrilled that I had the chance to come and be with all of you. Libraries have always meant a great deal to me, as I know your librarian, I know that you're friends of the library, and that's so important, because you know, when you think of how many communities the library is in so many ways, that it really is the magnet. Because it's the place where a teacher can say, you know, I want each one of you to go down and find, and we've got on a shelf down there. I want you to go find one of the books out of these 40. You go pick one that you want to read. Or the fact that when you go into there and you see some little kid that's looking at some little book that somebody had given at one time or another, while mom or dad are looking through the stacks. I mean, you just stop and think of how many times that repository of so many of the things that have been the most precious of a community, and libraries. So I want to thank all of you for being involved with your library. And I'm thrilled to be able to say we have a wonderful new library over in Missoula. And I just, when I go to various communities to talk, one, I like to be invited to the library to do it. But I always drive around town and I want to see where the library is. I always want to see where the library is in a town, because I think it makes a real difference. It just does. So, thank you all very much. I'm delighted to have you.